Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Essex, for those of you from outside Essex. My name is Sasha Rose-Neal. I'm Executive Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, and it's my pleasure to be introducing this evening's events. Before we start, just a few housekeeping things. First of all, we're being filmed. There are film cameras behind you, so if you don't want to be on film, most of you actually, it will just be the back of your heads. But if you don't want to, then please do move. If you move over to this side of the auditorium, you'll be out of the line of sight of the cameras. So I don't see an exodus. Excellent. Everyone's happy to be filmed. Also to say, there are no planned fire alarm tests. So if you hear an alarm, it's real. Please exit the building. There's a sign just behind you where you came in. And that way, over there, that way. So those two directions, please. Please leave the building promptly. You might have seen the bathrooms are off the entrance foyer and are signposted. If you need any assistance with anything, the Talk Big Data team are all wearing badges and they're dotted around and are very helpful. Please could you ensure your phones are switched to silent so we don't get a recording of lots of phones being rung. And if you're interested in tweeting, then please use the hashtag #TalkBigData. Very keen to encourage people to tweet. Okay, now on your way in you may well have picked up a clicker. Have you all picked up clickers? Do you have clickers? Okay, good. We want to use we want to get you to engage with us by using the clickers. So just to tell you how they work, you press the relevant button A, B, C, D, E, depending on the answer that you choose to the question. It's very simple. We register your vote and then we'll come back to the answers later on. Don't press anything quite yet, but I'm about to give you the first question as a little warm-up. So, holding your clicker, could you tell us, please, which of the following applies to you? Are you A, a student, B, a University of Essex member of staff, C, working in the private sector, D, working in the public sector but not at the university, or E, other, which is a big category, including members of the general public, people working in the voluntary sector, and whatever else you might come up with. So A, student, B, University of Essex staff member, C, working in the private sector, D, working in the public sector, excluding the university, or E, other. You're registering your votes, identifying yourselves anonymously. We got that? Yep, thank you. Okay, question 2. How much do you feel you currently understand about big data? A, a lot, B, a little, C, nothing at all. A lot, B, a little, C, nothing at all. Yep, okay, good. And finally, for now, do you think that big data is changing society? A, yes, B, no, C, I don't know. A, yes, B, no, C, I don't know. I see quite a few big data experts in the audience. I hope you're all saying yes. Yes? Okay. All right, we'll come back to some of these questions at the end. But I want to move on now to introduce the series. So today's discussion is the last in the Talk Big Data series that we've been hosting here at the university. It's organised by our 3 big data projects, which are all funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and we're very proud to have these really important ESRC investments based at the university. And they are illustrated behind me by these nice banners. We've got the Administrative Data Research Network, the Business and Local Government Data Research Centre, and the Human Rights Big Data and Technology Project. In addition to these ESRC projects, we have lots of other big data expertise, particularly focused around the newly launched Institute for Analytics and Data Science, which serves to bring together all our big data projects, and our wonderful institution now, reaching nearly its 50th birthday, the UK Data Archive and UK Data Service, really important kind of national institutions in the social sciences. And there are other multidisciplinary big data projects across the university and new ones starting all the time. Tonight's topic is big data and society. And the question we're asking is it a game changer? But first, what is big data? There are numerous ways in which big data is defined, but for the purpose of tonight's discussion, we're talking about extremely large and or complex data sets that can be analysed by computers with humans to reveal patterns, trends and associations, especially related to human behaviour and interactions. More data is being generated and collected than ever before, from mobile phone records to social media interactions and purchase transactions. Indeed, the rather mind-boggling statistic from IBM is that 90% of data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years. That's really quite amazing. This vast amount of data, along with an increased number of affordable tools to process it, is enabling us to extract new insights into how societies operate. From the patterns and trends that can be revealed by research, big data can provide insight that can help with policy making, service delivery, and can benefit us all as citizens and public service users. But it also poses numerous challenges and raises concerns of a social, political, and ethical nature. With this in mind, I'm going to hand over now to our chair, Lynn Wyeth. Lynn is the head of the information governance function of Leicester City Council, and she has 10 years' experience as a practitioner in this field. She holds a postgraduate diploma in information rights and the Information Security Management Principles Certificate, and she's an accredited healthcare information security and privacy practitioner. She's the author of 2 books, A Practical Guide to Handling Freedom of Information Requests, which should be on many university reading lists, as we get quite a lot of those, and Data Protection, Compliance in Practice. Lynn advised the Government of Jersey on the implementation of freedom of information legislation. There's more about her in your programme, which is on your chair. So, Lynn, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Can everybody hear me at the back? We're good to go. OK. Before we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce our other panel members. Beside me, I have Lord David Willetts, currently Executive Chair of the Resolution Foundation, an independent British think tank established to improve the standard of living of low and middle income families. He served as a Member of Parliament for Havant from 1992 to 2015, as Minister for Universities and Science between 2010 and 2014, and has previously worked at both the Treasury and the No. 10 Policy Unit. Welcome, David. Next to Lord Willetts is Professor Heather Laurie, MBE, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Research here at University of Essex, where she is responsible for developing the university's research strategy. This is a relatively recent post for Heather, who was formerly the Director of the Institute of Social and Economic Research and led a team of world-class research and survey experts in the production and analysis of longitudinal data, providing evidence on how people's lives are changing. Thank you for being here today, Heather. Next to Heather, we have John Pullinger, CB, who is the National Statistician for the UK and has been in post since 2014. John is also the most recent chair of the United Nations Statistical Commission. John, thank you for joining us tonight. We have a lot of questions for you, as you have a lot of data. Further details about any of our panellists can be found on the programmes and your chairs. So a little bit about myself. I'm very honoured to have been asked to chair this panel tonight. My personal experience in this field is actually twofold. I am the privacy expert and vice chair of the Administrative Data Research Network, which gives trained social and economic researchers access to linked, de-identified administrative data in a secure environment. So if, as researchers, you need to access this data, we're your first port of call. Secondly, I am the Head of Information Governance at Risk at Leicester City Council, large unitary authority serving 350,000 people. Diverse services offered by a council means the collection and processing of huge amounts of data, both personal and non-personal. The council began using data for innovative solutions many years ago with the introduction of our Star Track system, which told bus users when the next bus would be at their bus stop, something that's now the norm in many cities across the world. In recent years, we've developed apps such as the Love Leicester app to report grot spots or abandoned cars, making use of GPS, meaning we can respond faster to notices of such issues. We've used our data warehouse to share data with the police as part of the Leicester Crime and Disorder Partnership to identify crime hotspots and target resources in areas where there's burglaries, such as giving grants for putting in gates between terraced houses to stop cut-throughs in high burglary areas, and this has resulted in a decrease in crime. We've also used the data warehouse to identify families we needed to help as part of the government's Troubled Families initiative. My role as the authority's data protection officer means that I have to ensure that the use of all this data does not breach any confidentiality or data protection principles, if the data involved is personal data, of course, and this can be quite a challenge. Another challenge for public sector organisations like my own and partner services we work with are predominantly the lack of skills and knowledge and the resources to pay for it. Rarely do we or can we, in today's times of austerity, employ data scientists or researchers. Despite this, we can see the possibilities that are available to us to improve services and make savings if we have the skills and capacity to use the data more effectively. I'm delighted, therefore, to be here tonight hearing from my fellow panel members about their experiences and how we can make this happen. So we're going to move on to questions for our panellists now. Firstly, I'm going to ask the panellists if they could give a brief overview of their experience, as I've just done, and a background as it links to big data and society. So, Lord Willetts, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I guess my experience comes mainly in two forms. First of all, as I do try to write occasionally about Britain and how society is changing, as a layman, but trying to access academic research, it can be very hard to find the kind of empirical evidence that you want. So I wrote this book, The Pinch, about differences between generations, and writing it almost 10 years ago now, trying to find data that you could use about the conditions of different age cohorts was incredibly difficult. I think it may have got slightly easier because there's more and more salience in that debate now. But it was frustrating, especially if you weren't a trained social scientist. You were just trying to find your way through the data and the research projects. I did, of course, come to Essex when I was writing that book, because I should say Essex can be very proud of its role in British social science, and it is a fantastic resource and is one of our great national centres for social science. So I just found it hard to do compared with, say, similar attempts at writing that type of analysis in the US. And then secondly, as the minister, I was very keen on promoting the use of administrative data and therefore encouraged the ESRC and helped secure funding for the Administrative Data Research Network. And I think Paul Boyle, the then head of the ESRC, Alan Langlands, who wrote the crucial report, did an excellent job and made a very persuasive case. That meant, in turn, when I had capital to invest, science capital to invest, we could put some into the Administrative Data Research Network. But as we all know, the problem at the moment, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is the Administrative Data Research Network and the secure data centres exist. And we should not take that for granted. Compared with where we were 5 years ago, the fact that the infrastructure has been created, they exist in the 4 parts of the United Kingdom. We have got in place the protocols and the clearances are necessary. That's all the good news. The bad news is there isn't much interesting social research emerging out the other end of this process because we're just not getting the material being made available by Whitehall departments. And we were discussing that, and I realise that's a challenge. I think the legislation, Digital Economy Bill, will help. It's also a matter of building confidence for my former colleagues, the ministers and their advisors. So my involvement is both having done a bit of writing and as the Minister promoting the Administrative Data Research Network in the first place.
Thank you very much. Heather, would you like to put your comments next?
Sure. Well, my experience comes very much from a higher education perspective of delivering large-scale data resources to the wider user community. And that's something that here at Essex we put a lot of effort and commitment into doing. Initiatives like the ADRN, the large-scale longitudinal studies that I've worked on throughout my career, these are all aimed at providing information to the wider social science community who can then use that for their own analysis to address the issues that they're interested in, and really it is a social good that we're producing in order to benefit not only the academic community but society at large. I think I've always had a very strong commitment to ensuring that data is not only accurate and reliable, but that the people who are providing us with those data are fully protected in terms of their privacy, their confidentiality, and that we minimise, as far as is humanly possible, any potential risks in terms of identifying individuals and so on. And I think the higher education sector has a lot to offer in that respect, and we've seen it playing out with the Administrative Data Research Network in terms of the protocols and so on that they have successfully put in place. We have had some real successes in linking administrative data to social survey data with the consent of people who are taking part in those studies, and it provides an extraordinarily powerful instrument to be able to understand social questions that either one type of data on its own or the other would not be able to answer. And I think it's really trying to understand how the linkages between the different sorts of data sources provide much more added value than just one data source alone. And that's what we need to be exploiting now. We're at the beginning of this journey. We definitely need to build a lot more skills and knowledge into the workforce around how to use data, how to use it responsibly, how to use it accurately, not distort it, and so on. So there's a lot of work still to be done, but I think the higher education sector has a really crucial role to play in all of this.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Well, you kind of said it in the introduction, Lynn.
Sorry,
this is my day job. So as National Statistician, I mean, I've described my role as mobilising the power of data to help Britain make better decisions. So big data is a big part of that. And if you see the newspapers over the last 10 days or so, is devaluation feeding through into inflation? Not yet. Is it softening the jobs market? Not yet, but it's coming. What's it doing to the national debt? It's not as bad as people might think yet. What's happening to the macroeconomy? It's still going along reasonably well. So every day you'll be getting numbers from my team, and increasingly big data needs to be part of the picture. But I thought I'd kind of highlight two other bits of my experience that might be relevant to questions in the discussion. I mean, first, as David has said, a long association with Essex. And, I mean, Essex does have a lot to be proud of here. As a researcher, I've been both a kind of supplier and a user of the archive over a long period of time. I chaired the UK Data Service Advisory Board for many years. But I was also the chair of the UK Data Forum at the time we were set up to advise the ESRC on its investments, and so we played a small part in advising them to go forward with the Administrative Data Service, the Secure Data Service, and what's now become the ADRN. So I'm pretty invested in what happens here and really keen to see it succeed. But just briefly, because it might also come up, Lynn mentioned the UN role. So I chaired the UN Statistical Commission at the time that the Global Goals for Sustainable Development were agreed last year. And so I was at the UN Summit last September. And it was just extraordinary how much people were talking about data. And not just Western countries. A number of West African countries are using mobile phone data to try and get census-type information much more quickly. A lot of countries, particularly sparsely populated countries, are using satellite data in very sophisticated ways to look at crops, but also to look at population movements. In some ways, these countries that may have got less of a tradition of doing things in a particular way are now able to be really creative about what's possible. And so there's a lot of lessons we can learn from other countries. But what I can certainly say is that there's a kind of Darwinian process going on here. Those countries that grab this data opportunity, both in terms of making the best of the potential and respecting some of the points that Lynn has made very, very clearly that we need to do in terms of public and business confidence. There is a big prize to be won there, and I see what other countries are doing. We're all moving quickly. The question for Britain is, are we moving quickly enough?
Okay, thank you. And so, carrying on that theme of big data in a worldwide context, why in 2013-14 do you think was big data deemed so important to the future of research in the UK to develop the big data network and more globally in terms of international development?
I think this is Essex being 1 year ahead of everybody else, because I've written quite a bit about 2014 or 2015 as the year the data revolution got serious. And my observation was, up until, let's say, 2013, there was a lot of hype. A lot of things, well, this is all going to be wonderful. But I didn't see my life changing. I think the example of bus stops is a very, very relevant one. Suddenly, across the whole of the country and across the whole of the world, we didn't just know when our bus was coming. We now know how long it's going to take. We now know which route we need to take to get to it. Now, that is a big change. And I feel my life is better now. If I'm travelling on public transport, it is genuinely easier. If I'm trying to book a holiday, I can do that from my sofa very happily and confidently. I wouldn't have felt so confident in 2013. And there are many, many ways in our own personal lives that big data is transforming what we do. I had a car, someone drove into my car, and I thought, I don't want to ring up the insurance company, it's going to be a world of pain. But within 24 hours, they'd done it, and the money was in my bank account. It was amazing, and that's data being mobilised for good. Now, the private sector is doing this really fast. The question for us is, within our universities and our public bodies, we've got just as big a prize, but have we got the nimbleness to take it? So 2013 was, I think, the time when it started becoming real to us. So you've done a great job, because I think you're a bit ahead of the curve, because you've done the research that will enable us to get the benefits.
Okay, thank you, John. And Lord Willetts, anything to add on that particular point?
Yeah, I think that the... let's start with the NHS and genetics. And there was a genetic data, and which would take us back a decade earlier to this, the original sequencing of the human genome just at the beginning of the century, and then the research agenda that emerged from that. And if you look at what we can do in the UK and what they can do in the US, you see a massive UK advantage. So that, because I've been over with some of our academics to try to compare notes at what they can do in the US, and because they don't have a health system like ours, whereas we can take someone's genetic data and link it to a primary care record, so we know that they got measles at 5, and know that they had a car accident at the age of 25, and know that they have been smoking 15 years and then gave up. You can put all that together, you can link up a whole series of different medical episodes plus genetic data. I have to say, in the UK, I would say Scotland is ahead of this. Scotland did fantastic work on diabetes, where essentially they took information about every person in Scotland with diabetes and tracked them through primary and secondary care and identified that what they could actually do to reduce the rate of amputations of limbs for people with diabetes. So we rather kind of complacently think that, and incidentally, when you say this 90, we heard in the introduction that 90% of data collected in the last 2 years, the other thing we've got in Britain, which is incredibly strong, is long historic series, fascinating, really old historic data sets. And the fact we've got old data that has been collected fairly reliably, perhaps for centuries, meteorological data, for example, is also incredibly valuable. So we've got lots of contemporary data. We haven't got, very few other countries have got anything like our historic data, and including, as you'll know, say, our demographic data. So you start with a sense of a fantastic opportunity. But we then find with the care.com episode that we had failed properly to take people with us as you try to develop systems that really enable all this data to be pooled in the NHS. And secondly, you find that when it comes to, well, and this is really the subject for this evening, when it comes to linking data for social science purposes, we are now way behind the US. So you start, and part of my thinking is urging that we should put some capital into this. So I thought Britain had a comparative advantage from our healthcare system, our historic data sets, the quality of our data science. We should be the world leader. That was the analysis of several of us, 5 years ago now. And my frustration is that at the moment, it's not inevitable, it can be rescued, but at the moment this opportunity is slipping through our fingers. Other places are getting a lead over us. Why should I? So I think there was an excitement that we had an opportunity to be a leader, and that excitement is currently, I think, diminishing.
Heather, would you agree with that? And how does this relate to the expertise at Essex?
Well, I mean, I think there have been a lot of challenges, and those challenges are going to continue in terms of gaining access to a lot of these fabulous administrative data sets. There's a lot of complex reasons for that. It's partly about resources, the fact that the data that we're trying to access, they weren't collected deliberately to be used for research. They were collected as part of the administrative process of running the Department for Work and Pensions or running the health service. And these are the data that result from the records of all of those different transactions. So they're actually quite complex data to use. We do need to be able to have the resources to be able to clean the data up, make sure it's reliable and so on, and make it usable. And that does take time, skills and money, unfortunately. Now, I think we still have a fantastic opportunity. We're halfway through the Administrative Data Research Network funding now, and I think that in the next couple of years, I would really like to see us have a real step change in terms of the sorts of projects that can demonstrate the value of using these data. Yes, it takes some resources to do it, but what we want are some really high-profile demonstrator projects to show what additional value you get if you can actually use those data. And I think that would then encourage confidence, both in terms for the general public about how the data are being used, but also within government and within the broader social science community as well.
Okay, thank you. So if we're to engage with the opportunities offered by big data and new technologies, how do we best deal with some of these risks, do you think, now and in the future? John, I'll come to you first.
I'll say two things on that. The first is just to follow up from what Heather's just said. I think the biggest risk is we fail to name the opportunity and we settle for something less than it could be. We ought to be world leading, as David has said, and we shouldn't settle for less. But I think we need to be much sharper at showing those exemplar projects. So we have legislation going through Parliament at the moment, and we need to put into parliamentarians' hands, into David's hands, some of the benefits so that members of Parliament can actually say, we need this for our country's prosperity. So one small thing that I did when the legislation went through, I just published a list of case studies that just came to a kind of group of us brainstorming. And it's not difficult to find, but very few people would have really appreciated just how much benefit you can get for kind of individual communities, individual industries, individual sections of the community that may be left behind, and very much goes to the current government's agenda around social justice. Data well analysed enables people to stand up and be counted in a way that ignorance does not, and it's as simple as that. So we need to make the case, and I think that's the biggest risk. The second risk, which I think Lynn's already alluded to, is taking the public with us. And I think there are reasonable, justifiable concerns, particularly about using data that's in the control of the state. When we give data to the taxman or to the benefits agent, we're expecting them to look after it and not for them to lose it or to do something inappropriate with it. And we have to care about that. And also some of these things that you could do, it's not necessarily right that we should. So, I mean, the only extra bit of machinery I've put in place since I took on my job is a National Statistician's Data Ethics Advisory Committee. And that may seem a bit arcane, but that's been really helpful to me. Having lay people, philosophers, as well as researchers in a room thinking, is this a right thing to do? So particularly looking at some very sensitive health data, looking at what you can do with information that reveals someone's ethnic origin, particularly at the moment. We have to think carefully about getting this right. because this is the goose that's laying the golden eggs for the research community. But we need to realise we've got a precious prize here, and we don't want to kill that golden goose before it actually gets hatched. Have I mixed my metaphors too much there? You should move on to another person, Lynn, before I make this worse.
Heather. Heather, any more risks to add to that and how we deal with them? And I know before we were talking about the opportunities as well as the risks and how we manage those.
I mean, I think there is a real issue of public trust, and I think all of the ethical issues and all of the moral issues about how you should use data are very central to our thinking. And you know, just because you can do something, should you do it? Well, sometimes not. You know, that will be the answer. So I think trying to find ways of building public trust that data are being properly used, they are being properly protected, they're being analysed in the right way, and so on, is a really big job. And I think we've still got quite a long way. To go with that. But again, if we can more and more engage the public to understand that this sort of analysis can benefit their community, can benefit their family, can benefit their employment prospects, can benefit their health, that understanding exactly what's happening in society does enable us to make better decisions in policy. It enables richer policy debates that are based on evidence rather than just a political opinion, perhaps. So I think there's a really important role to play there around public engagement, and I hope that events like this can contribute towards that to some extent, but I still think we've got quite a long way to go with that.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Lord Willetts, you were a Member of Parliament, you were a Minister. Mm-hmm. How did you take people with you? How do we do the public engagement and get that trust?
On that, by the way, although transparency may be necessary, transparency doesn't gain you trust at all. There's no evidence that being transparent. I trust them. We put every single MP's expenses claim down to the paper clips are now available online, and all it means is people can construct silly stories about how much they're spending on paper clips. So it may be desirable, but it doesn't create trust. And people like Honora O'Neill are fascinating on this. So it's how you behave and what your purposes are and how you engage your critics that create trust. So transparency, by and large, doesn't solve the problem. And that's learnt from painful experience. It doesn't mean pass it on. In terms of the other lessons, I would say one that actually this comes from my time as Universities Minister, something we haven't touched on yet, is that I guess what we're talking about today is quantitative social science. And the other problem for Britain, if I may say so, with sitting in Essex, where you're very strong with this, people who are both interested in social policy and have quantitative skills and training are quite rare in the UK. We have not, partly because of the structure of our education system, especially English specialisation, you have people who go to university to study social policy who have a passionate interest in how their society is changing and themselves probably want to change it, but may not necessarily have the maths to do the modern stuff. And across a lot of the humanities and social sciences, there is a gap now between the qualifications that many students have and the kind of work that they need to do. And so for me, I did PPE, but so for me, you have people who do political science and suddenly discover they're set to read a paper on a regression analysis of voting in the US presidential election. And they gave up maths at 16 and completely panicked. So the first thing is these kind of initiatives to help provide maths support for people who are doing a wide range of disciplines at university, may not have got A-level maths, or even if they have, not the right kind of maths for what they want to do. And I think that's really important, because otherwise we don't. And my understanding from my conversations, and maybe I'm out of date or out of touch, was that one of the anxieties the sector had was just, have we got enough quantitative social sciences? Imagine that all this data was suddenly made available. Have you actually got enough people with the proper training to use it and analyse it? So that'd be one extra angle. And the second angle from my time in politics is getting the right level of ministerial engagement. And of course, because the arguments change and flow back and forth, and ministers instinctively have a sense that they don't want to hang their hat on one strong research finding at one point in time. Look at all the arguments around Jeremy Hunt and weekend health care and whether there's a problem going to hospital on Saturday or Sunday and whether there isn't. I think how Vince and I in BIS, in the cuts exercise we had to do in 2010, were heavily influenced. I was certainly aware of research by IFS, which Alison Wolfe had popularised, of some vocational qualifications having negative returns in the labour market. Not just low returns, negative returns. Somebody at the IFS had done the research, a woman with an Italian name, right? Serenade or something. And that meant that when we were trying to allocate public expenditure savings, we were pretty tough on some vocational qualification, education, because we know it gets a negative return. Then, after I'd stopped being a minister, at Resolution, actually, I meet some guy who comes in, a professor at University of Westminster, I think, who says, by the way, I've reanalysed the data, but this time properly allowing for the social background of the people doing these NVQs. And I think if you allow for the fact that the category of people doing these NVQs at FE colleges were actually from unusually disadvantaged backgrounds, once you allow for that, actually the returns are positive, not negative. We've believed for the last 5 years that the returns were negative, but now actually they're positive. And then I mentioned this in passing to someone at the IFS who says, no, we don't agree with the methodology of the guys used at the University of Westminster. Actually, our original result stands. Now, welcome to academia, in a way. Now, the trouble is that, meanwhile, actual decisions are being taken by ministers about the vocational education budget. And at each stage, you're kind of influenced by this shifting debate. Now, all I've ended up is completely unsure what we know about returns to vocational qualification, and extremely reluctant now to cite any evidence on the subject. But the only thing I know is people still have to decide what the budget is. And so at any one point, you could have been kind of caught out in the process. So that's the other thing, pitching it right so that people aren't suddenly investing significant political credibility in things which then prove to be less robust. So you want to have some influence, but not too much influence.
Okay, thank you very much. Just picking up on what you said there about potential skills gap, and have we got enough data scientists and analysts in the country, talking particularly about researchers and universities. How about earlier? How do we get this embedded into our national curriculum, into schools? IBM have just moved into Leicester. We've attracted to the city, which is fantastic. How do we encourage our children in Leicester to want to go and work for IBM, and what skills do we need to give them to be able to do that, when, let's be absolutely brutally honest, as a school governor, some of our teachers, do not have those skills themselves to be able to teach the children?
Well, can I say something about something that's happening here at Essex? We have a scheme where we're associated with a number of schools, and we're actually going into the schools to talk to the students about particularly technology, ICT type subjects, STEM type subjects, but we're also bringing sixth formers onto campus to do some of their A-level courses actually on campus to get them into the idea that they will come to university. And a lot of these students, they're living in disadvantaged areas in Essex, going to schools which you would not consider to be particularly high-performing schools, and it's been an incredibly successful scheme so far. So we're going to be continuing that. There's a definite skills gap. Absolutely, I absolutely agree that we need to somehow be training our young social scientists, but also our young computer scientists and our young historians about how to use data and what's the right way of using data. And we've got a lot of initiatives here at Essex now where we're creating interdisciplinary degrees so that we can actually have people who are studying sociology or social policy, but can also do modules on data analytics and so on. So I think that's really what we need in order to be able to try and bridge this gap that we've got. It's a real problem, but things are happening, so all we can do is continue.
That sounds really positive. John, have you got something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I chaired a National Statistical Literacy campaign for a few years ago now, and this kind of issue of education across the people who are not statisticians really came across very strongly. And in our campaign, we concluded there were two especially critical sets of intermediaries that we needed to get to. One was MPs and the other was journalists.
Yeah.
But what I could say very
straight... two more scrupulous groups of men and women.
Two of the least trusted
in the country.
But what I can say, I mean, I had the good fortune that I was actually working in the House of Commons at the time, as David knows. When you actually present it to people as something that actually helps them do their jobs better, they want to learn. And particularly journalists, they absolutely sapped up the kind of simple techniques that we were giving them that enable them to write better stories. And similarly, MPs. I mean, the Daily Mail made a bit of fun of a report that we did in the House of Commons Library, teaching how to do percentages and simple things. But if you've not been taught it, you don't know it, and you can look really silly. And if you have a kind of safe space in which you can actually learn, people want to learn. So that is point one. And point two, I mean, I also try and get round and talk to schools. The most recent one I went to was a school in quite a deprived area, very low levels aspiration, and the head teacher wanted me to sort of do an inspirational talk to raise the aspiration of the children. So obviously I was going to talk about sums. But I went into the group and said, so what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about sport, or do you want to talk about shopping, or do you want to talk about maths? And we did the poll, we do like polls, and sport came up first. So we talked about sport. It didn't take very long talking about sport before you got into the numbers and the odds of people winning something and who was up and who was down. And then we just kind of started discussing, and they were really into it. I said, exactly. Caught you, we're talking about maths. So who wants to talk about shopping? And then we got into loyalty cards, and we got into that. And they said, oh, well, we've kind of done maths now. And they said, oh, really? That was fun. Brilliant. So I think part of it is the way we talk about it. Exactly. We talk about it in a way that is somehow an alien language. Yeah. But if we're teaching people something that helps them be better at school, as an MP or as a journalist, why wouldn't they like it?
Yeah. Great points. Lord Willetts, anything to add on that one?
No, I think John's was wonderful. And that is the problem with the way maths is taught. So that sadly, it is becoming, in some schools, because of the way the curriculum is constructed, more detached. Just a set of meaningless kind of manipulations. No, I think it's fantastic example.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stay with you, Lord Willetts, because we're going to get political now. With the changes in the political landscape on both sides of the Atlantic, 3 years on from the initial big data investments, what do you see as the future of using big data for research in this country and indeed globally?
Well, I would say that the most charged area remains kind of social mobility and what kind of opportunities parents think their kids are going to have is a highly charged issue. And we know that a lot of what the people who voted for Trump and the people who voted for Brexit, one of the things was driving them was anxiety that things are getting worse and my kids are going to have worse opportunities than I have. So the social mobility debate, I think, remains crucial. And that does it. And it's a great example of the frustrations of where we've got to. Because, and I had this conversation with the great John Ermish, how much the British social mobility debate is still determined by the 1958 and 1970 cohort studies. And the ingenuity of the British social science community in endlessly reanalysing the 58 and 70 cohort studies to get yet another finding is impressive. It's incredibly impressive. On the other hand, it is two rather limited data sets. And as John said to me once, without all the stuff about how social mobility declining, I remember John saying to me, 2 points don't make a trend. But we haven't got. We didn't do one in the. We didn't do a further study in the 80s, and I've done my official apology, retrospective historical apologies. I very much regret that the Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher didn't do one. We had the Millennium Study, and we then had, tragically, the collapse of the attempt at the 2012 birth cohort study. So we've got limited data from these detailed cohort studies. There's lots of other sources of data you can use. That's why it absolutely ties in with this agenda. So I go to listen to someone like Raj Chetty from Harvard, or has he gone to West Coast now? But he's talking about, with evidence, using millions of data points on social mobility in the US. And he can say, using US data, if you went to Iowa Dental School trains 4% of America's dentists, or if a specific head teacher leaves a school, in the following 10 years, the cohort going through that school will have a total lifetime earnings loss of $5 million compared with what they would have had if the previous high-performing head teacher had stayed at the school. He's got incredible kind of data. And I just listen to his presentations and I think, why are we not able to do this in the UK? We should be a world leader in all this, and the social mobility debate is incredibly limited. It's constrained because we should know far more about the granular routes which people take through British society, and we don't. And it's potentially there, but our understanding now, and you all know research projects that I'm unaware of which help with this understanding, so I apologise in advance if I'm being too negative. But I would say, sitting in policy debates in Whitehall and Westminster, the data sets that are used, the research, much though I love them, if I see Joe Blandon and Greg and Wandsworth on the 58-70 cohort studies proving that social mobility has declined in Britain because if you were born in the bottom quintile, the chances in 58 were going up slightly greater than your chances in 1970. If we could move on from that to something using a transformationally different, wider range of data to have a much more granular picture of what that would be fantastic. And the reason why and the British debate is not very good, and people can just say social mobility is declining because we're not using all the data we could to get a much better picture of what works and what doesn't. And so I would ask questions, which are I think the questions that policymakers are entitled to ask, like, how much social mobility do we buy for an investment of, say, £500 million in the following different places? We've got limited resource. So how much social mobility do you get for £500 million extra on early years provision as against £500 million on adult provision or supporting apprenticeships or whatever? And those are just the education interventions, as before you get into some of the others. And that is a reasonable question for a policymaker to ask. And there is currently, I would say, in Britain, virtually no capacity to give even the most primitive answer to that question. So you can't understand the process, and you can't get started on analysing the policy options that would follow up if you did have some understanding of the process.
Okay, if I just throw some statistics in here for you. The Big Data Dilemma report was published at the start of this year, and it suggested that if we get smarter about how we use big data, 58,000 jobs could be created in the country, £216 billion could be put into the economy. Companies are currently only analysing 12% of their data, and many of them are called data phobes. And there's a digital skills crisis in the tech sector. In the light of Brexit, it seems to me it makes sense that we need to be prioritising some of this, as we need to build up our economy, as we don't know what's going to be happening and we're missing a trick here. How do we do that, John?
Well, certainly I agree with the analysis. I think if you think of the future of the country going forward. I mean, innovation is the core of our future success. And if you think of data, or big data in particular, as a kind of defining resource of our age, mobilising that data to turn it into something beneficial is therefore a kind of very urgent imperative. So I think, as I said earlier, I think we're beyond the hype stage. We know this is real. We know there are tangible benefits to be grasped. So we need to do it. And I take a very straightforward economic approach to this. We need to support the demand side, support the supply side, and build some infrastructure. So on the demand side, I would start particularly with the people who are likely to use the data. So we've talked about politicians, but senior civil servants and kind of other people who may not know just how valuable this asset is. So help them understand how to use it. On the supply side, it is about education, but you can tackle education in many ways. You don't necessarily have to wait kind of 18 years before you've got a new system. So we have just introduced some data analytics apprenticeships, for example, that have been immensely popular amongst my staff and amongst others, just to learn some new skills. And it's not just teenagers that are going for these sorts of things, it's people who are older. I think the apprenticeship scheme as it's now cast is something for everybody. So building all the way up through that, we've talked about the kind of quantitative skills for historians and social scientists. ESRC has very much been a kind of global leader in thinking through the Q-STEP programme how you can give postgraduates and undergraduates the kind of skills that will make them better at their substantive research subjects, and then all the way up to PhDs to really prioritise the kinds of investments you have there. And some universities are moving fast. I was at Imperial at their big data unit, and that went from 0 to 100 in a year. So a bit of energy and a bit of investment, they are moving. And this university's got some great examples too. We have some brilliant universities here who can get some fabulous skills going quite quickly. But we will struggle. So demand side and supply side, but also the infrastructure. And some things we haven't talked at all about yet. We haven't talked about data quality, how you put some investment into getting the data actually fit to be used, and that's going to need sustained investment. Some basic pieces of infrastructure. Lists is the one that is occupying me at the moment. We don't have an open authoritative list of the addresses in the country. We don't have an open authoritative list of the businesses in the country. As soon as you've got one of those, and there should only be one, then a whole load of new things can flow from that. Yeah. Particularly about businesses and locations. Yeah. People is trickier because we've had issues around identity cards. I can't imagine that being immediately something that is going to get traction here. But just doing the things we know we can do. There's only in the last few months been an authoritative list of countries. There were many of these. I mean, this should not be rocket science. But your infrastructure enables you to move traffic from one place to another more quickly. Investing in that infrastructure would enable us to connect these supply and demand sides much faster. So straightforward economics, I think, can help us in this industry, the data industry, as it has helped us in many other industries in the past.
Heather, would you like to add anything?
I think everything that John says is absolutely correct. And the quality of data is always an issue, and it's one that we spend a lot of time worrying about, really. But partly that's also about training people to understand what good data looks like and be able to actually understand data, be able to manage data, be able to see where, there are obvious errors, and be able to do, make the changes that are needed to make it fit for purpose. I think there's still a long way to go. The new apprenticeship, higher degree apprenticeship system is just coming online. We already have 4 of our departments who are taking part in that. We're one of the first higher education institutions to actually be actively pursuing that as a route, and we're looking for that to expand over the next few years. So I think we're seeing a broadening out of different sorts of educational provision, different sorts of training opportunities, and what we need to make sure is that all of these issues around how you use data, how you do a good analysis, how you interpret that analysis needs to be part of that whole process.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned, John, particularly about supply and demand. we find when we put data out there as open data, we don't know what happens to it. We don't get that feedback to say that was brilliant, we've used it for this. And obviously we get the blockages sometimes with central government departments, being nervous and risk averse about sharing it. How can we incentivise people who have constraints about budgets and the skills and knowledge to actually take the time to release this data and sell it to them, that it's good to put it out there? Lord Willetts, any ideas?
I think it's quite difficult to get a very kind of systematic feedback loop in there, but it is possible to use some case studies that open people's minds. So the case study I've used most frequently recently has been DEFRA. DEFRA have released, I think, 8,000 data sets in the last year, and some of them are very niche, but some of them are very substantial. So, and the one that I think has been particularly powerful is the LiDAR data set. So it's small area topography. And I know about this data set because one of my sons is an engineer and he in the wind industry, so understanding the topography and how wind flows over it, that's what he does. He's a mechanical engineer that measures wind flows. But a big thing for his company is work out how much they were prepared to spend on this data. Now it's free. That will open up a whole load of innovation in the engineering industry, but in lots of other industries as well. And there are many applications. So just describing the kinds of things that one data set has enabled by way of small start-up businesses finding applications of this that would never have happened when it was locked up. I think that's the way you kind of inspire people who are sitting on an asset, unwilling to release it.
Lord Willetts, something to add?
No, I agree with John. And the way, and again, this may be happening. I apologise if it is happening and I wasn't aware of it. But in some of the catapults, which tend to be more on the physical side of things, they run fantastic competitions. So let me give you a practical example. The Satellite Applications Catapult, which I happened to be visiting recently at Harwell, is trying to excite people in the use of satellite data. So they run a hackathon for a weekend when guys, they are by and large guys, I have to say, emerge from their bedrooms and lofts, and they put their pizza aside and put down the can of Bud and emerge at this hackathon and come up, sorry, that's every stereotype in the book, and have a hackathon on what they would do with satellite applications data. And I can remember the winning entry one year that I went to it. It was people who were using data of exact weather changes and in weather around the coffee plantations of Rwanda, and using weather data and linking it to another data set about the circumstances in which some nasty pest flourishes, they were able to work out the right time to apply the pesticide that killed the pest. Plus, they knew the weather conditions that gave the coffee beans the flavour that commanded the greatest price on the coffee market, so they could advise you when to pick the beans and when to apply the pesticide. And they wrote a set of programs for this, and they're going to communicate to Rwandan coffee farmers on their mobile phones with a simple app, information with these two crucial bits of data, which they said would boost the Rwandan coffee industry. Now, that is the kind of stuff that you get. Now, there should be social science hackathons when people come up with policy, areas of policy that are cracked if you can use these type of data sets. And now, it is not all a one-way process. I actually wish that people on the physical sciences had a greater understanding of historical context and social background, and sometimes, again, from the compared with social sciences, they're sometimes naive about part of the framework of intellectual frame that anyone working in the social sciences has. But in these kind of areas, the potential is... I am on the board of the CRIC, and we had an exhibition, our first exhibition in our new building, opened the other week, with kind of visualising genetic data. And we had one image up there, and the little footnote underneath it says, this is based on 100 million data points. So that's what you can do with some of these. And it should be, you actually can do social science. I look forward to the day, and it should not be far off, when we're doing social science where there's a graph on income inequality or whatever, and it says this is based on 100 million data points. Then that would be really granular, interesting stuff. And people with generating smart software that enables them to analyse this data in innovative ways. And as I say, often competitions saying, we're throwing all this data out, you turn up for a weekend and you... let's have a competition. Who can think of a smart use for it? They do a bit of it down in... they do a bit of it at Tech City and the Open Data Institute. It does happen. Yeah. And there are some fantastic winning competitions. I remember another one there of a programme to enable you to work out where there was an available public tennis court or spare football pitch that you could use if you were trying your team to have a game of football on a Friday evening, to scan where in the nearest, within a 5-mile radius, there was an unbooked available football pitch on a 5 o'clock on Friday. All those so generate, and none of us in this room are going to be able to predict how this data could be used. So generate opportunities for people from a range of backgrounds to come in and compete for smart ideas what to do with it.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Conscious of time, and what I want to do now is open up questions to the audience. You've heard enough from me. But just to sum up what our panel members have said so far, the question at the start was, is it a game changer? I think we can see the possibilities that, yes, it can be a huge game changer, but there are challenges ahead of us to enable that to be so. I think we need to consider how we incentivise people to release the data. That's been one of the blockages so far. How do we resource that? How do we fund it? We talked before we came in here about the potential for secondees to go into these departments that have data, to help them cleanse their data, to help them put it together to release it, and then nobody else is doing it on top of their day job. We also need the skills and knowledge. We've talked a little bit about how we can get it into our schools, how we can bring that skills shortages up. We need to show the exemplary projects and the case studies. We need to demonstrate to people very much what big data is, how it can help them, how it can be give them efficiency savings, how it can improve services to the service user and the citizen. And I think one of our biggest challenges is obviously how we engage politicians to continue to support the work that's been done so far, and how we engage them into buying into the use of big data going forward in what are going to be politically turbulent times over the next few years. So I'm very much hoping that Lord Willetts and John, in their roles, will be able to bring some influence in that sector in particular, and we'll leave that with you to take back to your colleagues in the House of Lords and the various departments in government. I'm also particularly looking forward to, in the future, a social services weekend hackathon sponsored by Lord Willetts. I think that will be a fun weekend out.
We'll run it jointly. Resolution.
Definitely, let's do that. That would be a fantastic way to sell it, I think, and lots of people would sign up for that. So thank you to the panel so far for the questions. It's not over yet. Now it gets really tricky. We're going to open it to the floor. We have the Talk Big Data team members with the mics. Mike, okay, so there could be a lot of running around. So if anybody's got a question to the panel, if you'd just like to say who you are, where you're from, and if your question is for a specific panel member, please let us know.
Okay, hi, my name is Katie Metzler and I'm from Sage. And actually on the hackathon, we recently sponsored a hackathon with DataKind UK, who I encourage you all to take a look at. They're a charity who partner social enterprises with pro bono data scientists. And we actually sponsored that looking at this model as something we might roll out and invite social scientists along the next time. So I will be inviting you, Lord Willetts. But my question is actually, we've talked a lot for maybe obvious reasons about admin data, but I'd be interested to hear your view. What about beyond admin data? When we talk about big data, other people are thinking social network data. Can you talk a little bit about what you think the potential for that is? Social media data, large textual data sets? And is that a game changer for social sciences?
Who'd like to take that first?
I'll go first, if you like.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I think that we should be looking at the full range of data that's available. I mean, that's the real data explosion that's happened, is around social media data and all these other forms of data that are being collected. And we haven't yet really figured out exactly how to use those data. There's a lot of work going on in the computer science kind of field, trying to understand how to actually manage those data, make them usable, mine the text, get something sensible out of it. So I think there's a lot of work going on in that area, a lot of work looking at visual data as well, and how you might use that sort of information. So I definitely think we should be looking at that broader range of data and how we can utilise that in combination with other sorts of more structured data, and what the advantages of doing that would be.
Okay, thank you. John, anything to add?
I certainly think there's a lot of potential there, but it requires all of us as researchers to free our minds. We kind of often start with a data source and then think, how do we answer a question from this? I mean, David's point about the cohort studies. Yeah. If you really start from the question and then think very open-mindedly about it, different things can happen. I mean, I've just established what we're calling a data science campus in our office in Newport. It's a separate bit of the office, so it's not kind of, it's kind of symbolising freedom of thought almost. And I'm hoping that will just give an expressive space for people who are quite often thought down a particular set of lines. So I'll give you a more specific example. We did it wasn't a hackathon, but it was a data science competition across the whole of the analytical community in government. And the winning entry came from the Food Standards Agency. And one of their problems was trying to predict norovirus. So that Public Health England could actually send out advisories and advise people what to do, but also for them as a regulatory agency to go and look at where the kind of food outlets were that were potentially contributing to this. But the winning entry was an analysis of tweets. And I won't give you some of the words that they were, but it was looking at words that people tweet when they've got the symptoms of norovirus. So it was quite hilarious. But it's not just word clouds, but it's also trying to think of things that, similar sites of symptoms that you might have got from a heavy night out, for example, and how you distinguish those that are most likely to be associated with norovirus. And so there's some quite interesting kind of analysis there as well. But the data source was Twitter. So it was public found data, and they found a brilliant association between what people were tweeting and when an outbreak was likely really to take off. So they were able then to advise, it's quite similar to the coffee example that David gave, advise Public Health England when to start their own social media campaign, advising people to take care of whatever it was, their own work within the agency, but also more general public health campaigns around. And norovirus starts getting going as the winter comes on, typically. But you can never quite predict when it is, so getting it right really kind of helps people take action. So that was a nice example just of using Twitter. So social media is a massive source. There's all sorts of biases and issues with it, but analysed properly, there's a lot of data there.
There's that book by Alex Pentland, Social Physics, which is kind of a visionary text about all this. And in fact, I think there was, I met him at, I think, the Royal Statistical Society, had him over for a year or two back. Let me just advance, try out an argument on you, though, which would go as follows. The US, the US essentially, and the US massive platforms are the holders of a lot of this large amount of this kind of data. And they've also got massive computing power. So it's not clear we have a comparative advantage in analysing Google and Facebook and Twitter data. What Britain has got, we don't have as much computer power. We've got a lot of organised data sets. If anything, our strength, and it goes back to what I said earlier about our history, if anything, what the UK has got is a long history, sophisticated administration, a large amount of organised data. And one of my worries sometimes is that the pressure will be eased for reform of access to administrative data if people, to put it very crudely, think, well, let's go down the American route, we can find all the answers via Google and Twitter. So I think there is a kind of there should be a distinctive British skill in the analysis and linking of more structured data sets. And I see, you know, when you look at the incredibly smart people at places like Google, the American approach is much more to take incredibly random data sets and find patterns in it. So my personal view is it's not necessarily the best use of limited UK expertise to do the kind of things which is a US strength.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question? Gentleman over there. Sorry.
I'll probably just shout it out. My big worry with this is that it's going to exaggerate the winner-take-all society. Thinking about a business, you might have these data sets that are made available and they might be able to come up with a product, but you've got 10 employees, you aren't going to get one of these people that we don't even train now to analyse this data, are you? It's going to be the big firms that are going to be able to literally cash in on this. I just wondered what you thought about that.
I mean, that's quite an interesting question, isn't it? How many data scientists and people scraping data are the guys in their loft, a one-man show coming up with innovative apps, and how much will be the big companies getting in on the act? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there is an issue there. I would like to see some big and significant UK capability. I do get worried if all of the big platforms, and it's the platforms that gives you the access to the data, are all American. And that's one of the arguments, and we're very lucky actually, education is a good area. FutureLearn, which is a UK-based educational platform, was deliberately constructed partly as an alternative to Coursera and edX, the big big US sites, partly in turn on the view that, of course, because when you're running one of these sites, you've got data on every click that every student on your site is making. So again, in terms of the education analytics, it's transformational. And why should that data generated by British or French students be used to enhance the value of a quasi-monopoly US platform? Yeah, so I think some of the problem with some of the way that the Cabinet Office has kind of just thrown the data over the fence is they haven't really thought about promoting the capability within the UK to analyse it. That's why these hackathons and Catapult centres are important. And sometimes you throw the data over the fence and the people who grab it and analyse it are Google. Now, I'm not anti-Google. It's probably net good for the world that we've got Google, but we don't have to further strengthen a quasi-monopoly. And thinking of who you might promote and grow as UK or European capacity to analyse it is a worthwhile activity. But they will themselves grow, I hope, into significant companies. I'm not against big companies. I just like to have some big British companies as well as, especially in this area. And because actually part of the care.com problem was the perception, well, ultimately this data is all going to be analysed on the West Coast, isn't it?
Okay, shall we go to another question? Gentleman there?
I'm Frank Dominy. I'm a European citizen born in the Irish province, and I'm working on my escape plan to get away to the mainland before I get thrown out. Lord Willetts saved me from going away in total despair this evening with his interjection about the Crick Institute. Because I found the whole evening very parochial. It's England, 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 little England. I work in a European framework, and I have an interest in history and economics and international relations as well. So I look at the neighbourhood, the European neighbourhood, both in the east and to the south of the Mediterranean. I'm trying to do skills transfer into the medical sector in the Maghreb, and I hope to be involved in the reconstruction team in Syria, now that the shooting is almost over. My question is, how are we going to be able to transfer the game-changing knowledge into the societies that I'm working with, like Princess Dima in Jordan and Princess Salma in Morocco and places like that, because we can make enormous social progress happen in those countries. Nobody wants me anymore here because I'm too old to have a real job. So I think my question is, how can I pick up what we're doing here and then transfer it into enormous added value, like I've promised the Tunisians that I can bring them between 20,000 and 50,000 jobs if they let me talk to their employment, their higher education, and their medical organisation. I'm sorry, I'm waffling on, but the question is, how can I pick up what we're doing here in the UK and transport it into the neighbourhood, into the Maghreb, into Syria, into Jordan and places like that?
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
It does. It's quite a challenging question. Heather, one for you, I think?
Well, I mean, I think it's incredibly important we take a global perspective on this, and I'm sorry if it all sounded a bit parochial, but we were thinking about our own particular UK data problems. But one thing that's happened, the lady sitting just in front of you there with the blonde hair, Professor Maria Fazli, has just been appointed as the UNICEF Chair in Analytics and Data Science. UNESCO, sorry. UNESCO Chair.
We have breakfast together in Morocco.
And so, oh, well, there you are. So, I mean, there are initiatives going on that are attempting to build the capacity in other countries in order to be able to benefit from using their own data for their own social problems and how they can develop their own economies and their own societies. So I think there is work going on there.
Well, I feel horribly alone when I stand up and run week-long seminars on machine intelligence, deep learning, and text analysis in Morocco. It would be nice if somebody actually discovered me.
Well, maybe this evening is it. You broadcast to the nation.
Any more questions from the floor? We've got a lady at the back there in the burgundy jumper. Might only have time for this question. We might have time for one more. So if you've got a very burning one, think about it. Gentleman there. Okay, we'll just take these two questions, then that's it.
Good evening. My name is Adriana, and I'm a student studying international relations and applied quantitative methods. Now I'll try to understand a bit better. How do you think the big data can change the way we perceive or we fight against difficult issues such modern slavery? And if, because in this area, one of the issues is the lack of data, the accurate data. So therefore, do you think it would be better if the big data comes of a linkage of shared data between businesses or other institutions, or what methods do you think would be the most efficient to use this new tool that we have to change the way we perceive such a complicated issue, such modern slavery? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Good question. What methods do we use? John?
I think something like modern slavery is inevitably difficult because it's hidden, and I don't think there is a kind of magic wand that big data can throw on that problem. But what I would commend is open-mindedness again. So I'll use two examples. I think the fight against Ebola in West Africa last year was some very smart people using some very clever data analytics on actually very small data, because it was very hard to track down. But it was data that managed to work out what the replication rates were and how you could adjust it. Crystal Donnelly and her team, some absolutely brilliant data analysis. And I think I would apply the same thing to modern slavery and some of these other really, really vexed questions. Just think, where are the touch points? Where does this become visible? And then start to analyse that. I mean, in your question, you're talking about Syria, and I think thinking about refugees, how people are moving. We talked about satellites earlier on. There are satellites would help you understand how people are moving, the way in which people are kind of interacting with administrative systems as they're arriving in countries, for example, in reception centres or whatever. There are multiple touch points for some issues. I think modern slavery is probably the most difficult, so we wish you good fortune with that one. But there are many others looking at that. I mean, the work that Frank Field has done in the House of Commons, I think they've been looking for evidence around how you understand the size of the problem and how you deal with it. So it's inevitably going to be uncertain, but I've no doubt that insofar as we can get data that shines a light on it, we will tackle it better. But that's going to be a tough one.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add mobile phone data is incredibly significant. And of course, again, you need a legal regime in which this is permitted, but you can track the routes that an individual mobile phone takes. You can observe where people are moving. The mobile phone is an incredibly powerful source of data about essentially where many people in the world are moving around all the time. Now, and there are very smart analysts in various security agencies and others who use it in that way, and the extent to which that kind of capability is made more publicly available.
Okay, thank you. Last question, the gentleman there.
I am Abdallah Saleh. I'm from the Department of Mathematical Sciences. I'm a member of staff there. My question is related to the issue of skills shortages, especially in mathematics, that you have raised. Now, the issue, of course, is that numeracy is a big problem. Is it now time also to create a new niche problem related to maths, which is datacy? Is it the time now to coin this term and use it and and make it a reality at the level of organisations, etc.? Thank you.
You heard it here first, datacy. Are you going to take that back with you, John?
Maybe. I think with the words we use tend to come and go, and I think from a marketing point of view, you've got to use the words that people are using to bring them in. So insofar as there is popularity around a particular phraseology, I think we should use it because it will draw people into our universities or courses or whatever, because it looks like it's something for me. But I think fundamentally we are looking at a particular set of skills that's at the intersection between computer science and statistics. This is where we need a kind of high-end set of brains. And I don't really care what you call it, but I think we should call it lots of different things. And some places are going to be machine learning, in other places are going to be artificial intelligence, in other places are going to be data science, in other places are going to be all kinds of things. But I think we need to think of what the core curriculum is that people really need to know. And it's about getting inference from large, complex data sets. David's given us some good examples of when you get it wrong. And we mustn't get it wrong. But equally, we need some really smart people who absolutely know this stuff. And there are new techniques to be had there. And understanding sparse data sets, kind of wavelet thinking has been something that's transformed our ability to do things like photography, but also to find needles in a multitude of haystacks. And we need people at the top end in Britain who are then taking that research to the next level for some of these kind of new problems. So I'm open-minded about what we call it, but if people are starting to use that particular phrase, let's go for them.
Brilliant, thank you. Lord Willetts?
John earlier referred to QSTEP, this initiative within the social science to kind of enhance the mathematical training of people working in social policy and social science. There is a second initiative called Sigma, which I'm a great fan of, and I don't know if you have it at Essex. And this is, it's got a slightly different market. It's the student I was describing earlier, the English student who gave up any kind of maths or science at the age of 16 in our absurd specialised education system, and turns up here and finds that some paper has been written using and analysing big data to make some interpretation of Shakespeare's plays, and he or she needs to get their head around that. And what, in places like Loughborough, what that does is essentially a 24-hour emergency maths clinic for a panicking student who doesn't do maths and wants in a completely kind of non-judgmental way, they've been set a paper to read, or they've got an essay to write, or they've got some questions to answer, and can't get their head around the maths and vaguely thinks, I need the maths in order to do the project properly. And so although there are issues about the curriculum and everything, given that we live in an imperfect world and we have not yet got, if anything, we're going back towards a more narrow 3A level model of the last stage of secondary education, providing, one of the great advantages of a university is it's a place where you can have a whole range of educational services. There are many universities, I'm sure it happens here, where if you really want to learn some French or some Spanish, you can go to get that kind of provision. Regardless of the discipline you're studying. Well, kind of making maths available, and I think of the kind of maths that people would draw would often be maths to do with the analysis of data. That's where a lot of maths is now needed, and again, where maths education conventionally is rather inadequate. So that type of initiative is a great way of just providing that kind of resource. So we shouldn't assume that unless we get it right early on, we've missed our opportunity. The university itself is a great second chance for people, and I hope that universities like this can make that kind of provision.
That's great. Thank you very much, panel. Much appreciated. Sasha, I'm going to hand back to you now for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. What an inspiring panel, full of really interesting ideas. We have to do the data science, social science hackathon. We do have a Languages for All programmes, as Lord Willetts said. We should probably be thinking in terms of Maths for All as well. We do a lot of maths support work with our students, and we have our students supporting each other with their maths as well. But I think a Maths for All programme alongside our Languages for All one is a really good idea. Before you all pack up and go, we just want to come back to the clickers. And we want to just continue our social science experiment on you. Now that you've heard this discussion, can you tell us how much you feel you understand about big data? A lot, B, a little, or C, nothing at all? A lot, B, a little, C, nothing at all. Okay, so we're going to show you the results, the before and after. So, we've gone from 26% of you knowing a lot before to 39% of you knowing a lot now. So that's definitely an improvement. Excellent. 64% of you knowing a little before, and now 55% of you knowing a little. And we've also improved the percentage of you knowing nothing at all, although perhaps not by as much as one might have hoped. Have you been awake, that 6%?
The percentage knowing nothing at all has fallen by over 30%.
It's a very small sample size.
Typical such a small spot.
And now that you've heard the discussion about big data, do you think that it's changing society? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. Okay, so what's the answer? 75% of you thought yes before, now 81% of you think yes. 7% of you thought it wasn't before, and now 13% of you think that it isn't. And 18% of you didn't know, and now 6% of you don't know. So interesting. We've moved some people away from not knowing and into thinking yes. And no. And
so the number thing, it doesn't change society, is double.
Yes. Yep. Okay. And one final question. Will this be a positive or a negative change? A, positive. B, negative. C, I don't know. Or D, I don't think there will be a change. A, positive. B, negative. C, I don't know. And D, I don't think there'll be a change. Okay, so this wasn't a question we asked you before. 47% of you think that it will be a positive change, 16% negative, and 34% of you are still withholding judgment, and 3% of you don't think that there will be any change. Okay, interesting. Thank you. Can I ask you to hand back the clickers on your way out? So we need them back. I hope you found that interesting. We're certainly gathering information to see what impact these talks have had on our audiences. I'd like to say a very big thank you to our panel, to Lord Willetts, to John Pullinger and to the home player Heather Laurie, and particularly to Lynn Wyeth for chairing the panel. And thank you all very much for coming. Before you go, I would just like to ask any of you who might have had your interest piqued in this whole area of big data, and particularly in the kind of ethical issues around big data. We've got a vacancy that has arisen in the Administrative Data Research Network, which is one of the 3 projects organising this series, for a member of the public, so no University of Essex staff members, thank you, to join the approvals panel. The panel helps to appraise every submitted research project that wishes to use administrative data within the network. If anyone is interested, please do come and talk to Judith, who is here. Judith, will you wave to people so they know who you are? Judith, who's been holding the microphone. Or you could email her at j.knight@essex.ac.uk. We're very keen to find someone, and especially amongst the audience here who is now so well informed. Thank you all for coming very much. Please stay with us and have a drink in the foyer. And let's just say thank you to our speakers.